This edition of the Duke Basketball Report podcast is brought to you by the law firm of Bird Campbell, with offices in Texas and Florida. Founded by a pair of former Duke roommates, Bird Campbell means business. Hey, Duke fans, welcome to a special midweek edition of the DBR Podcast. Guys, it's going to be a crazy one. This is just folks. I'll bring in my two partners, and then I'll tell you what we're going to do. First of all, back in Washington D.C., I know we had some audio problems because he was in Nashville. Donald Wine, is your audio better now that you're back home?
Well, I certainly hope so. I am back in the normal spot that I am for the majority of our podcasts. So apologies to people out there for the ones on Sunday. I was on the phone for that one. Hopefully this one will be a lot better and you guys can hear me.
Oh, your dulcet tones. You sound so beautiful right now. And also
thank you, Jason.
Out in Denver, Colorado, my man, Sam Klein. How you doing, Sam?
Guys, I'm going to relay the story of my morning that I think both of you saw on Twitter earlier today.
Yes, it's a good
just
story.
To emphasize,
Please.
Just to emphasize what a strange day today is. I normally set my alarm for 5 a.m. on weekdays, and this morning I rolled over it and I looked at the clock and it was 1:50 a.m. And for whatever reason I read 1:50 as 4:50. And I was like, all right, well, it's basically time to get up. So I got up and I started making breakfast. I had succeeded in putting a piece of bread in the toaster and starting to make my lunch when I looked at the clock in the kitchen and realized that it was actually 2:00 in the morning and not 5:00 in the morning. So I shrugged my shoulders. I took the toast out of the oven. I out of the toaster oven. I left it on a plate on the counter and went back to sleep. And then just finished the process at 5:00 when I woke up, with my alarm. So I'm having a very strange day, and I did not know, as that was all happening, that we were going to get so much weird college basketball news, and so like coincidentally with some content that we were going to run anyway, right, Jason?
Oh my gosh! It's just so people. I'm going to try and tell you a little bit of what has gone into making this podcast today, because it's just crazy. It's just so here's what happened. About a week ago, about a little more than a week ago, I went to an event where Josh Pastner, the head coach of the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, spoke. And he was really great. He was very forthcoming and very honest about what it's like to be a Division I head coach in the ACC. And it was a really good event. I enjoyed it a lot. I asked him a very pointed question about the Louisville scandal and the UNC scandal, and he answered my questions. He had a couple interesting things to say about Duke. And when this event ended, I went up to him. I gave him my business card and I said, Josh, I just want you to know I'm a big fan of yours. I love Georgia Tech, but I'm really the world's biggest Duke fan. And I do a podcast, and I'd love it if you'd be a guest on the podcast. And Josh Pastner shocked me by saying, I'd love to. And so he agreed to be a guest on our podcast. And about 5 days ago or so, we recorded an interview with him. It went very nice. It was really interesting. Donald and Sam listened in. I conducted the entire interview, and we're going to let you listen to that in a minute. And the plan was that it was too much. Putting that interview with the stuff we did over the weekend, where we did all our predictions for the season, where we recapped the second exhibition game. We just had a lot of stuff going on. It was a full podcast. If we also did a Josh Pastner interview and previews of Duke's first 2 games of the season, it would have been the podcast that went on forever, and none of you would have listened, and we want you to listen. So we said, you know what? We'll just take the Pastner interview and the Utah Valley preview and the Elon preview, and we'll do those together as a special podcast in the middle of the week, right before the games start on Friday. We thought, no problem. This will be a piece of cake. And then something crazy happened this morning. A story dropped by CBS Sports where a former associate of Josh Pastner, a former friend of his, alleged some pretty nasty, pretty crazy, pretty wild things about Josh Pastner's program. And Sam, I want to turn it over to you for a second. my head is still going crazy. Explain to folks sort of this story we've heard about problems at Georgia Tech.
Yeah, so I'm going to do my best to summarize here. I read Gary Parrish's account on CBS Sports, and I actually just finished listening to his podcast with Matt Norlander. And so I'm kind of like still digesting it sort of along with everybody else. But from what I have read and understood, basically the guy who is at the center of all this is a fellow named Ron Bell, who lives in Arizona and has known Josh Pastner like since he was a student athlete at University of Arizona when Lute Olson was the coach back in the 90s. And what it appears is that Mr. Bell has been providing small but real impermissible benefits to a number of Georgia Tech players, paying them small sums of money, giving them shoes, letting them visit him in his house, like out in Arizona for some reason, and like go in his swimming pool. He has pictures of them. The whole thing is like, it is very weird because a lot of times when we have scandals like this, like the Louisville scandal, we're talking about sums of money like in the six figures and or people getting, people's parents getting jobs at universities, like big amounts of money and big lifestyle changes. And for this, it was like, it's just lots of little gifts, like, $500 here, $700 there, like not life-changing gifts for any of these players. But it seems like it was just in an effort to kind of keep the Georgia Tech student athletes happy and part of Pastner's program. One of the complicating things about the whole thing is that Mr. Bell appears to have had some substance abuse issues. He spent some time in prison. He had issues with his it wasn't with his parole, but like with his probation. So he's not like the squeakiest, cleanest guy that Pastner is associated with, but he's a longtime friend. He has a number of connections in the basketball community. So he's one of these people that I guess was just kind of always around. And it seems until very recently that Bell and Pastner got along really well. And the story is out now, it sounds like, because they had some kind of falling out, and he, I guess, had the leverage to go take all this evidence public to CBS and show that Pastner's players have been receiving impermissible benefits. So the whole thing is kind of surprising. I think, one, because the character involved is so fascinating, but also because it's not really like most NCAA eligibility issues that we've seen before. Like I said, it's not big sums of money. It's like small gifts and over, to a lot of guys. It's not like it was a recruiting thing. He was doing this to guys who were already in the program. So I don't know. It's kind of a lot to digest. Jason, did you want to like? I don't know how you wanted to handle this.
Yeah. So I agree with you. It seems so weird. Now, a couple other things worth noting. One is Georgia Tech has already self-reported these violations. Now, Mr. Bell claims that Georgia Tech self-reported them because Josh Pastner knew that Bell was going to blow the whistle on him. But Georgia Tech reported this stuff a few weeks ago to the NCAA. Like you said, the amounts of money are like $700 total for one player, $500 for another. And again, that's not cash. That's not gifts to them. Most of that money was to fly these guys out to Phoenix to hang out at this.
To just hang out with this old guy.
To hang out this old guy's house. It's just, the whole thing is like, it's really weird and a little bit creepy and bizarre. And like the note now, I don't know Josh Pastner well. I've spoken to him on a couple occasions. I've had a few emails with him. He's a smart guy. I do know that. Josh Pastner graduated from Arizona in 2.5 years. He took accelerated courses. He got his undergrad degree in 2.5 years, and then he went on and got a graduate degree while he was still there. I think he even got a couple degrees. I mean, like, this is a guy. This is a very driven man who is
2 degrees while eligible to play basketball.
Yeah, which is impressive.
So Jason, I just want to interject real quick. In according to the article, Georgia Tech made this announcement last Thursday. the self-reporting of the violations. And
Wasn't
they
that the day
suspended
we
both players.
interviewed? Wasn't that
That is the day we interviewed him. Like, this
Yeah.
literally happened just after we get off the phone with him.
Yeah. But anyway,
It's
the thing I was going to say was, so Mr. Bell alleges that Josh Pastner was doing this to keep these players happy and keep them from transferring. Like, he says, that's the reason. That's his big, that's the scheme here. Like I was saying, Josh Pastner's a bright guy. The stuff here it's not something that would keep a kid from, it's not like Josh Okogie, who is one of the key players involved, who's Georgia Tech's best returning player. Had a great freshman year, was all ACC rookie team. It's not like Josh Okogie goes, oh wow, I was thinking about going to a bigger time program and making my way to the NBA, but Coach Pastner arranged for me to get a $300 flight out to Phoenix and hang out at some old man's pool. I'm not going to leave now. It doesn't make any sense.
That's what's so weird about it, right? It's like impermissible benefits just for what's the cheapest way you can get impermissible benefits?
The kids probably wouldn't care about.
Yeah.
It makes no sense, and it's very much worth noting that at this point, one person's side of the story has been told. Bell's side of the story has been told. We haven't heard anything from Josh Pastner. We haven't heard anything from Georgia Tech. At least I don't believe. I looked. I didn't see any response from them. There hasn't been a full investigation. I mean,
right. And the entirety of the story is Gary Parrish's article that is more or less a oral history as told to him by Bell. Right. There's almost nobody else quoted in the article. Josh Pastner's certainly not involved in it. So we're going to hear a lot more about this in the coming days, even though, right now it's a little bit of a scramble because Georgia Tech is off in China playing games.
Yeah. The only thing that Georgia Tech did, and it's at the very, very bottom of the article, they released a statement today. Josh Pastner, I guess they're in China. We'll get into that later, but he quoted, "As I have throughout my career, I remain committed to following NCAA rules. Any allegations that NCAA rules weren't followed will be investigated thoroughly by our compliance department while I focus on coaching my team." So I think that's standard from, especially since they've already kind of addressed this by self-reporting the violations and suspending the players last week.
I'm eager to hear the other side of the story. Because, like I say, the whole thing doesn't make sense. It doesn't pass the full smell test, and I find that when that happens, there's usually other facts or other information that comes and fills in the gaps, and suddenly you go from, wait, this is the story, to, hold on a second, maybe that's not the story. I don't know. None of us know, but anyway, we wanted to address it because it was sort of this fairly significant thing hanging out there about Josh Pastner. And as you guys say, we spoke to him on the very day that this was beginning to break. Our interview with Josh Pastner is coming up right now. Obviously, we did not speak to him about this scandal. As we said, this broke after we interviewed him, but we still think the interview is really interesting. We hope you guys enjoy it. So here's the conversation I had just a few days ago with the head coach of the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, Josh Pastner. So Coach Pastner, thanks so much for joining us here on the Duke Basketball Report podcast. We usually go for people who have a direct connection to Duke, and I think that the coach of a rival school certainly would qualify as a direct connection. I know you've only been in the ACC. You're coming up on your second season. Tell me, first of all, how did you got the job at Memphis when you were 31 years old? It's amazing. Those of us who are huge college basketball fans are like, how did he do that? It's a great story. I heard you speak the other day. Tell us the story about getting your first head coaching job at Memphis, a big-time program.
Yeah, no, it's I was obviously kind of the right place, right time to follow John Calipari. Part of it probably was because nobody wanted to follow him because his last 4 years, which I was an assistant, part of it was the most wins in the history of the NCAA in a 4-year time period. More than than anyone has ever done that in the 4 years. So when he left to take the Kentucky job, I was planning on going to Kentucky and was all excited about being with him going there. And then after about 16 people got pay raises because Memphis went after him, they couldn't shut the program down. They had to keep the program moving, and I was kind of the last man standing. And when I got the job, and at 31, you're handed the keys to a multi-million-dollar company as a CEO, basically. And it was a heck of a run. It was a heck of an experience. It allowed me the opportunity to become the head coach at Georgia Tech. And I'm going into my 9th year as a head coach, so the opportunities at Memphis, and then here I'm in the ACC and coaching against guys like, Coach K and, Roy Williams, and, Jim Boeheim, and, obviously last year with Rick Pitino. And so going against 4 Hall of Famers in the league, it was just what an incredible experience and an opportunity for a young guy like myself.
Now, come on. You told me a great story about driving in the car to Kentucky. Thinking that you were going to Lexington when you got the Memphis job. Our folks have to hear that story.
Yeah, well, what happened was I was in the car going to Lexington because I was, heading that way to work for Coach Calipari up at, Lexington, up at Kentucky, from leaving my time at Memphis. So we were all heading to Lexington, and then I got a call from the athletic director telling him that he needed to see me. And I was already, up on the on I-40 East heading to Lexington, and he ended up asking to see me. I thought for sure he'd hired his head coach. He wanted me to stay as the associate head coach because, we had some great guys that were going to come in with John Wall and Xavier Henry and Eric Bledsoe and DeMarcus Cousins. And I walked into his home, and he just said to me, "Do you want the head job? Or do you want the job?" And initially I said no, if I'm going to be an assistant, because I thought he had hired his head coach. He wanted me to stay as the assistant associate coach to keep some of the recruits. And I said, no, if I'm going to be an assistant, I'm going to stay with Coach Calipari at Kentucky, at Lexington there. And he slammed his fist down because here I am, 31, turning down the chance to be a head coach at Memphis. A 31-year-old turning him down now. He's been turned down by everybody. And he says, no, do you want the head job? And that's how I got the job. I mean, it was literally like that. And, of course, once he said that, I said absolutely. So, it was a heck of a run, a heck of an experience. And when you're taking over a company of that magnitude, you have a grace period. You have, you're going to, follow someone around. I was handed the keys, and I was by myself for multiple weeks until I hired somebody. I mean, it was a crazy ordeal, and following him and then taking over at Georgia Tech. The great thing about taking over Memphis is you're just trying to survive, in a sense that you're taking over something at the very highest of high levels that's ever been done. And then at Georgia Tech, you're taking something over that's a rebuild, a major rebuild job. So from my end, from my spectrum to see it, that I've seen it both ways, something taking over from the very top and also seeing something taken over at the very bottom, and how to, the lessons you've learned from, both those journeys.
So let's talk a little bit about Georgia Tech very quickly. And let's start with the way you build a program, which is recruiting. I have spoken on the DBR podcast a good deal about all the Atlanta kids that Duke has in their roster this year. There's Wendell Carter, there's Alex O'Connell, there's Jordan Goldwire, and there's Jordan Tucker. All 4 of those guys came from the Metro Atlanta area. Metro Atlanta has had as good a crop of high school basketball players as it's had in decades in recent years. You're at Georgia Tech. What's it like to try to recruit those local kids? How do you sell Georgia Tech to them, and how frustrating is it when they all end up going to Duke?
Well, a few things. I would say this in recruiting, especially here at Georgia Tech. One is we're not going to be able to survive on just getting Atlanta or Georgia kids. We're going to have to recruit out of our locale. That doesn't mean we're not going to want to recruit Atlanta and Georgia kids, because we are, and we've got to do a great job there. But for us to have the survivability in this league, we're going to have to go get guys from New York, Florida, D.C., up and down, the Carolinas. We're, up and down the Eastern Seaboard. We're going to have to find kids. There's Texas. We're going to have to do our job just outside of the locale as well too. But I'd also tell you, like, for example, like Duke, we got in there late with last year with Wendell Carter, and we put a lot of time and effort, but it was going to be hard for us to beat Duke. I knew that. I really thought we were going to have a chance to get Alex O'Connell and possibly George Tucker. We put a lot of time and effort, and Duke came in, boom, and offered them, and both kids took it. What I would tell you is this. For us to have success here at Georgia Tech, it's kind of a three-pronged thing. Number one is you can either get the same guys that Duke and the North Carolinas and the Kentuckys are going to get those instant impact freshmen that are studs right from the second they step on campus. Well, the reality of that, we're not beating Duke for those kids. We're just not. I mean, we're not going to beat Duke. We're not going to beat North Carolina. We're not going to beat Kentucky. We're not beating Arizona for those kids, or Kansas. That's just the reality of it. A lot of times people make big mistakes in recruiting when wasting time and being inefficient. Knowing when to get out is a key thing. So you could try to do all that, and then you're wasting your time. The other two things that we've got to do, the two-pronged thing, is one, in this league, we're going to have to get old and stay old. And this is a major rebuild job. Now, last year we overachieved. Part of it is because we were older. I mean, we maybe weren't overly talented, but we had multiple 23-year-old seniors on our team. And then this year, though, not unfortunately, but we have three guys back who are good players, and Josh Okogie, Ben Lammers, and Todrick Jackson. But everybody else is a freshman, or anyone else that's returning didn't play, or played very minor minutes. So this is going to be harder for us in year two than year one, because we're playing with such inexperienced guys, and it's very, very hard to do in this major rebuild. And that's why it's going to take multiple recruiting classes for us to get old and stay old. And then the third part of that is we've got to be perfect on our evaluations, and we've got to be near perfect on our development. We've got to do such a good job on both those areas. And so, right now, look, the facts are Mike Krzyzewski and John Calipari are recruiting at a level that has never been seen before in college basketball. And I don't think it will ever be seen again. I mean, once those John Calipari and Mike Krzyzewski decide to retire and move on from their jobs, maybe they go back down to a little bit of reality, but right now those two are at such a level, it's not even in the same stratosphere with those two guys, the level they're recruiting at. And you can throw in Kansas, Arizona, obviously North Carolina. I mean, there's just some other schools are in that same, or maybe not where exactly those two are at, but they're darn near close to it. And so you can again, you've got to know, as I said, the number one thing in recruiting, I think, is knowing when to get out, not spinning your wheels and wasting your time. So we've got to get old and stay old. So hopefully in time, our 22-year-old senior or 21-year-old junior doesn't mean the 18-year-old freshman that Duke signs, that 18-year-old is probably going to be a top 10 pick, but hopefully for that game, that 21 or 22-year-old, based on maturity and just experience, could play better in that one game scenario than that 18-year-old, even though that 18-year-old might have more potential and helps us win that college game for that time.
Get old and stay old. That's a really interesting philosophy and way of thinking about it. And I know you will succeed. You've been such a great recruiter throughout your entire career. Somewhat related to that, I want to ask you: is it tough to recruit at Georgia Tech? Is a school that has a reputation for getting smarter players and having players go to class and look at Georgia Tech. There isn't an easy major. There's no easy classes you can hide a kid in at Georgia Tech. You can probably tell where I'm going with this. I want to talk to you a little bit about, how you compete with something like the UNC scandal, where guys are able to go there and not go to class at all and not have to worry about schoolwork, or the scandal that we saw at Louisville where guys were potentially being paid $100,000 or more to attend University of Louisville. Talk about those things and the ripples they've put through the recruiting world and through college basketball.
Well, I can really, obviously, talking on Georgia Tech for us, I mean, there's no question the school's a hard school here. I mean, as we tell guys, this is not a 4-year decision. It's a 40-year decision, because if you come here, you get your degree, the doors that will have opened for you, you don't even need basketball anymore. Like, Like, it's great if you can keep playing, but you don't really even need it because of the amount of opportunities, doors, people you meet, just because of the strength of the alumni base, and just being in Atlanta. You know, people love basketball here. They love ACC basketball. Maybe they're not a Georgia Tech fan, but being at Georgia Tech as a basketball player, as a student athlete, you're going to have opportunities that just come about because of the people in the city and the amount of Fortune 500 companies and all those things that go with that. So, you know, I mean, look, I've said this, not everyone's the right fit for Georgia Tech, and we're not the right fit for everybody. It's just kind of how it is. And I wouldn't want to, you know, if a young prospective student athlete is maybe not really interested and has no desire in school or whatever it may be, this might not be a good fit for him. Even though we really want him as a player, partly because if he's here and he's just totally under stress the entire time, and you know, then he's not going to be able to fulfill his potential on the basketball court. And so does our pool at Georgia Tech shrink and is smaller as in terms of guys who can handle the academic load and two who are good enough to play at this level? Yes, it is. It makes it a good scenario and a bad scenario in the sense that there's not a lot of guys, but there's also a good sense there is not a lot of guys, so you can focus all your attention on that. But, you know, that's just all part of it. And, look, every school has its, you know, highs and lows. There's always going to be some things here and there, but I'm a positive guy. I look at everything positive as the glass is kind of overflowing. And I look at college basketball. Yes, that FBI scandal or the FBI issue that happened a few weeks ago, was that a punch in the gut for everybody? Of course. I mean, everybody got knocked on their heels that was involved in college basketball. But if you really look at it, 99.9% of everything is there's so much good about the game. It's healthy. Is it a big time business as well too? Of course it is, and there's no denying that either. But it's just part. We're in 2017. It just is what it is. But there's so much positive. There's a lot of good things, and we sometimes get focused on the 1%ers the 0.001%ers who are maybe have a chance to go to the NBA, whereas the 99.999% of everyone else really needs the college experience and the college education and the college opportunities in order for them to have the opportunities later on in life, because they aren't going to be a professional basketball player.
You talked, when I heard you speak the other day, you talked a little bit about compliance and how major that is in your job, in your role. Talk to me a little bit about the NCAA and how coaches interact with the NCAA.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, there's no question. I mean, compliance, you know, I probably spend 85% of your job is on compliance, especially in this day and age with the new rules with the head coach control. There's new rules regarding head coach control. No longer can you say, well, I didn't know. You're kind of almost guilty until you're proven innocent, in a sense that you've got to really show that. And so, so that being said, that's just part of the job. I mean, there's just a lot of compliance. The NCAA rule book is very complex. It's a very complex deal, and that's part of compliance. But you've got to have governing rules, governing bodies. I mean, that's all part of it. Look, there's obviously pretty black and white rules that I think everyone's pretty clear on. You know, you don't have academic fraud. You can't pay players. You can't funnel money to an agent or to a financial representative hoping to get financial gains or monetary gains later on. I mean, those have been going around since I think the NCAA was formed in 1906. Those are from the beginning. But there are so many other things that are so minor and complex in the NCAA rule book, but that's part of the job of being in college, and it's not an easy deal, and it's a constant thing. And I've always told people that's the biggest difference between the NBA and college. And I just saw this where they were doing a story on Patrick Ewing. Jeff Van Gundy said this. He said in NBA it's 90% coaching and 10% you're managing people. In college it's 70% nothing to do with basketball, 15% managing and 15% coaching. And so it's a different deal. It's a totally different deal. And so it's all part of it. I think there's many great things. You're having an opportunity to really impact young people's lives. And again, you need the governing bodies. People say, well, break off from the NC2A. Well, you still got to have you're still going to have governing rules and things that you're allowed and not allowed to do. I mean, the NFL has it, the NBA has it, Major League Baseball, everyone, regardless of whether you're pro sport or not, Pee-wee football or youth basketball, there's rules. I mean, everywhere you go, there's going to be rules. It's just, maybe there's some rules that people disagree with or whatever it may be, but there's got to be a governing body to kind of govern the whole aspect of whatever it is.
Hey, we're about to wrap up, and thank you so much for your time, but I want to get back to the ACC this coming season. Talk to me about Georgia Tech, where you think where your strengths will be, how you'll compete in the conference this year. Can you be brutally frank about your own team?
Yeah, I can. I mean, first of all, let me say this: the ACC is the best in the country, and the best league there is. And Duke is. There's no question. Duke's obviously number one in the polls, and they're going to be the favorite to win the national championship. I know this is, a lot of fans that are listening to this podcast are going to be Duke fans, and I'm just telling you right now, Coach K he's unbelievable what he's done. He's maybe the greatest of all time of any coach in sport, and if he's not that, he's in the top 5. I mean, he's just amazing at what he's done, and I've always told people this, he gets every team that they play, they get everyone's greatest shot. And but they continue to win at such a high level. And so, he's one of the greatest to ever do it, regardless of sport. Regarding Georgia Tech,
Josh,
yeah,
can I jump in and ask you what you're a guy, you're in the same profession as Coach K. What do you think has set him apart? Why is he? I mean, have you studied it? Have you thought about it? Why is he the greatest?
You know what? I think obviously he's. Look, the facts are he got a little lucky early on in his career. I mean, if maybe in those first 3 years, if it was in today's age, and he said this, I'm not putting words in his mouth, there may be you could get fired based on his first 3 years if it was in today's game. You know what I mean? You might not get that fourth or fifth year. You don't know. And so, and I've told people this all along. You've got to get a little lucky in recruiting, and that's what happened. He signed that class that came in, so they got a little lucky. They got a guy to sign. And what happens is, it turns the corner for him. It's no different than Bobby Cremins at Georgia Tech. They got lucky getting Mark Price. He was kind of under-recruited, and he ends up being an Olympic gold medalist and in a basketball Hall of Famer, basically. So, it's you've got to get lucky in recruiting, and that's what happens. So, but what he's done is his ability for his teams to have such great chemistry, and they play so hard, and they don't get upset by teams that they're supposed to beat. Teams that they're supposed to beat, if you look at his record, they never get upset. They beat the teams they're always supposed to beat. And yes, are they recruiting at the highest level and getting the best players? Of course. But the facts are the facts. They win and win and win. And he's a master motivator. I mean, the facts are what he did with the Olympics and everything else. And regarding back to Georgia Tech, this is a major rebuild job. And I've said that year 2 is going to be harder for us than last year. And like people picked us 9th this year. I think right now that's too high for us. I mean, we're young. We got some guys coming back, but the majority of the people, as I mentioned in the beginning part of the podcast, we're just young. We're counting on freshmen or guys who are returning who didn't play to really, be good for us. And we're not old right now. And that's the biggest thing. And in this league, you got to be old. And we're not old. So I think year 2 of this job at Georgia Tech's going to be the hardest of the years of the rebuild job. Coach K, I was with him at Media Day, ACC Media Day, and we were talking, and he said back in the day with Bobby Cremins and them, he says the Duke Georgia Tech games were just, as I mentioned, were absolute battles, wars, dogfight. It was unbelievable the intensity of those games. And so
I've gone to many of them. They were great games. Great games.
They were amazing games, he said. So I'm hoping we can get that back in time, but we've got a long, long way to go before to that point. But I would just tell all the Duke fans out there, man, I hope Coach K coaches another 10 years. I mean, who knows how long, but I wouldn't take him for granted. You never know. I mean, it's, each game he coaches, and I just think he's, the greatest, one of the greatest ever to coach, regardless of sport. And don't take him for granted. That's for sure. That's for certain.
Well, Georgia Tech head coach Josh Pastner, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It is a rare treat. You are a true gentleman for doing this and so accomplished in your career thus far and so much success. I am certain, based on what we've seen in the past from you, that you're going to get that Georgia Tech program where you want it to be. That may not be good for us as Duke fans, for Tech to rise up some, but as an ACC fan who lives in Atlanta, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks again, Josh. You're a great friend of the podcast.
I really appreciate it. Look forward to being on again. And don't forget, we play Duke. I think it's the 20. I forget when it is, but it's a Sunday night game. So I know you're going to be there. And I'm hoping that even if you're a Duke fan, you live in Atlanta, get your tickets now. Hopefully we can. It should be a great evening of basketball. So if you're in Atlanta, get your tickets and come to the Duke Georgia Tech game.
Josh, that reminds me, you told the funny story when I saw you the other day. You guys beat North Carolina last year, and tell the story at the end of the game. Roy Williams wanted to pull his team off the floor.
Part of it, we were playing North Carolina, and 3/4 of the crowd was Carolina fans, and we were, it was about 12 seconds to go or 11 seconds, whatever they've been, and the game, we were going to win the game, and he came down to the sideline to come and shake my hand and say, "Great job, Josh," and we're going to, he said, we're going to take our guys off the floor because, we don't want to get, because, stampeded, basically. Everyone rushed on the floor, and once the buzzer sounded, I grabbed his hand. I said, "Coach Williams, I really appreciate that, but look around. You might get booed," but I said, "Nobody's storming the court. There's 3/4 of the crowd here is Carolina fans." I said, "You're probably going to get booed, but nobody's storming the court." Because at the time, and he says, "Good point," and they finished the game and shook the hands at the end. Because at the time, people were saying that was the greatest upset in ACC history. I mean, I think we were like a 30-some-odd point underdog at the time. I mean, North Carolina A&T, who was the worst team in college basketball, ranked based on rankings last year, we almost lost to them 72 hours earlier than playing North Carolina at home. We got lucky in the last minute and a half to find a way to win the game, and 72 hours later, we're playing basically the champions who are going to win the national championship, and we somehow won the game, and we won in double digits. It wasn't even close. We had a double-digit win, and so people were saying it was the greatest upset in ACC history ever. I think as the ACC went on, maybe it wasn't considered as much, but at the time, like Dave Odom texted me and says, "That's a great." What happened was when we beat Carolina, I didn't get as many texts after the game because most people thought the score was misprinted on. Until the next day, did they really recognize that was the right score? They get so many texts, but the issue was we played them on Saturday. What a great game! And then I've got 72 hours later, we got to go to Durham. We're playing, Duke, and to talk about a smashing. They just absolutely kicked our rear end like you wouldn't believe, but that was a perfect storm. Duke played the best they've ever played that last season was against us.
I remember the game.
Coach K's final game before he had the back surgery. Grayson Allen came back. You had this, you had that. I mean, the place was so loud. It was electric. They were hitting every shot. It was unbelievable. It looked like we were on roller skates the way they were driving by us, hitting threes. It was the perfect storm. We just caught them at the wrong time, and they just absolutely smashed us. But hey, that's what it is. That's in the ACC. You just you win a game, the next thing you're playing another team, and you just got to keep moving. Everyone's good in this league.
Well, Josh, I didn't mean to keep you this long. You're a good man. Thank you so much for being a part of the podcast with us. We will check in with you later if you don't mind, and good luck to Georgia Tech. I will honestly tell you I'll be rooting for you in every game, but maybe one or two this year.
Understand. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
So again, I want to thank Coach Pastner for joining us on the DBR podcast. He was very forthcoming, I think. It felt to me like he had some honesty in there. The two things that stuck out to me, and guys, I want your reaction, but the things that stuck out to me, there were two key moments. One was he said, "We have to get old and stay old," which I think is it's fascinating to think about that from the standpoint of a college basketball program, because at Duke, we're young. And he's saying, I can't compete with young guys. I need to get old. And I just thought that was a really interesting line. And then the other thing, I mean, he came out and said, Coach K and John Calipari are recruiting at a level never before seen in college basketball. And I do want to note that I think that probably is really frustrating to a guy like Josh Pastner, because when Josh Pastner was an assistant coach at Arizona, and when he was when he was an assistant coach at Memphis, and also a little bit as head coach at Memphis, Josh Pastner was considered one of the best recruiting assistants in the country. I mean, this is a guy who built his reputation very much on connecting with players and recruiting them. And here he is on our podcast admitting that these other guys are just doing it on a level that he can't compete with. Go ahead, Sam. I was just going to say, what was your takeaway?
Well, to build on that, the interesting thing that we talked to him about is how he's in a desirable location geographically. I don't know necessarily about the school, and he admitted that the academics at Georgia Tech are tough, and that that they're like the academics combined with their recent program history doesn't make them necessarily attractive, but it's a big school that's in the middle of a big city that has a lot of talent, as we've talked about a lot recently on the show, because Duke has recruited a lot of kids out of Atlanta and the Atlanta area in the last few years. So it's interesting to hear him talk about it and even mention all of our guys by name. It's like, I want a guy like Alex O'Connell, and I can work really hard to get him, and I can't offer what Duke can offer.
I'll tell you really quick on Alex O'Connell. When I saw Josh Pastner at this speech he gave at this event that I went to, he was really clear. He really wanted Alex O'Connell, and he was a little steamed, as he said he thought that Coach K just kind of swooped in at the last minute and grabbed him. I mean,
Alex O'Connell's right in the recruiting range of somebody who's not going to go pro, but will stay for 4 years and like be an all ACC star, and could have been that guy for Georgia Tech. And, he'd play like more this year at Georgia Tech than he will at Duke this year. And he would be more featured down the road than he probably will be in his time at Duke, but Duke just offers so much more access. And I liked how candid Pastner was about that.
Donald, how about you? What was your takeaway from the Pastner interview?
Well, first of all, you start at the fact that, this guy is still really, really young. I mean, when I was 31, that was like 4 years ago. I was sitting on my couch like I'm doing right now, except I didn't have a podcast to record. Like, this guy was coaching college basketball for a major Division I program and has since moved on to another major Division I program. That's incredible. And just the mind that he has to get from, start at Memphis and move on and eventually move on to Georgia Tech. I really admired that. And just the fact that he talked a lot about his journey and how he got to where he was in college basketball.
Well, and we know, that first job at Memphis didn't go quite as well as people expected it to. And
Right.
Yet he managed to parlay like one of the best jobs at probably a second tier conference into a job in a top tier conference, which guys don't normally do when they're about to fail at Memphis, is go to the ACC.
And you normally don't. I mean, you have guys who are in their 50s that can't do that, and he was doing it in his 30s. And I think that shows the bright mind and really, honestly, you talk about the future that this guy has. He has a great future, I think, and you can really tell from how he views the landscape of college basketball. And I thought that mind was very, very, he was very forthcoming with a lot of that. And I think it was remarkable to really listen in and kind of get a sense for who he is as a coach and how he feels he can adapt. As these younger coaches, as coaches get younger, they're going to be able to adapt better to players, as the system goes along. We talk about, one and dones, if it switches to two and done, if there's a theme of college basketball players, and getting recruiting, like, he's going to be able to adapt to that a lot quicker than some of the more established veterans who are kind of set in their ways. And I think that was really telling. He was able to give us a little insight into how he approaches, this landscape and what his thoughts are on it. And I think that was great to see from a coach, especially one of an ACC program.
And to add kind of going back to being at Georgia Tech and being in Atlanta, he did say that, like he mentioned Bobby Cremins and how Bobby Cremins built a whole career out of coaching Georgia Tech. Josh Pastner's in a job that theoretically he could be in for decades if he does well. So like Donald said, he got there really quickly. He only just turned 40. So we're going to be, provided that this scandal doesn't bring him down, which I don't think it will. Sounds like there will be probably minor violations depending on how true everything is. But he's going to be a head coach in college basketball, presumably for another 25 years.
Yeah. And with, like you said, with him being in Atlanta, it may not have worked out for him this year when you talk about the players that from the Atlanta area that eventually ended up at Duke. But Atlanta in Georgia in general is just ripe with talent. And when you're down in that area, he's going to win some of these battles. Derek Favors and those type of players, like he's going to get some of these guys through the years. And I think that's what's going to keep him in Atlanta and keep him at Georgia Tech. And I think he's in a really good situation when you're talking about a metro area that is really starting to has always been known for basketball talent, but it's even starting to grow exponentially in the national level when it comes to the talent that's coming from there. So he's really in a good position to succeed.
So there's also drama surrounding Georgia Tech on the trip they're on right now in China. And we're just going to get into this very briefly, but because we've been talking about Josh Pastner and Georgia Tech and the whiff of scandal and the such. So Georgia Tech is over in China with UCLA. They play this weekend in a special game in China. The teams went over early. I think Josh said that they're going for like 10 days or something like that. What a great, an amazing opportunity for the kids on both these teams. But that amazing opportunity turned into something just kind of crazy. And, we talked at the beginning of the podcast about this has been a day of just bizarre news. So apparently, I don't want to convict them. You're innocent until proven guilty, although I'm not sure the Chinese legal system works that way. But apparently it does not. No. Apparently, there were some players from a U.S. college basketball team who shoplifted from a Louis Vuitton store. If you're not familiar with Louis Vuitton, it is, very expensive, high-end luggage and handbags and things like that. I mean, you couldn't shoplift one item from a Louis Vuitton store for less than $500, I think. But apparently there's a Louis Vuitton store right next to the hotel that the UCLA and the Georgia Tech players are staying at. And some shoplifting happened with some very tall African-American men. And
of which we should note, there are not very many tall black men in China.
No,
generally.
No, I think there are.
You could eliminate the tall. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I've been to Beijing a couple times. Ain't a lot of black people there.
No.
Right. So the police come into the hotel where the Georgia Tech and the UCLA players are, and they interviewed several players from Georgia Tech. They interviewed several players from UCLA. They were able to determine that the Georgia Tech players had nothing to do with this. And then they arrested 3 of the UCLA guys. They arrested 3 freshmen, Cody Riley, Jalen Hill, and LiAngelo Ball. Yes, LiAngelo Ball, Lonzo Ball's younger brother. This is just like a crazy story. I have to say that I'm sure that Chinese prisons are really nice places to be, and these guys are probably being treated great by the Chinese authorities. This story is still developing. We'll probably know by the time we get this podcast posted, we'll probably know a lot more about it. But at the moment, UCLA says these 3 players are not with the program. I'm guessing that they're still being interrogated or something like that.
Yeah, something tells me that the UCLA compliance office doesn't have a ton of sway with the Chinese penal system.
Well, let's break this down. First of all, I know exactly where this Louis Vuitton store is. I stayed at that hotel when I went there 5 years ago.
Oh man.
So I know exactly what it is. I know exactly what they're talking about when it comes to store.
What did you shoplift from the Louis Vuitton store when you were there?
Look, man, don't ever shoplift in China. First of all, second of all, if you're gonna get a Louis Vuitton bag, you go to the silk market where it's a Louis Vuitton bag with a B, not a V, and you pay like cheaper. $5,
right,
instead of $500. But here's the thing: Chinese law, is not uncommon for someone who is detained to be detained for 30 days before they're even indicted. 30 days. Think about that. It could be possible that these three guys, including LiAngelo Ball, could be detained for 30 days before they even get indicted. I'm pretty sure in China, it's like a 99% conviction rate. And if they get convicted, they could face 3 to 10 years in Chinese prison. That is incredible.
I'm surprised you're not talking about chopping off their hands. I mean, some of those places in Asia, you get caught doing a crime. I mean, wasn't there a guy like from Virginia Tech or something like that who painted some graffiti in Shanghai or someplace like that, and he ended up being in jail for like 5 years?
You're talking about the guy who got the caned in Singapore.
That was it, yeah.
That was from years back.
But it was like crazy. I mean,
yeah.
I'm sure these guys are terrified right now. But I'll tell you another thing. I'm sure this is a absolute PR disaster for UCLA and for China. I'm telling you, these players are going to be released without an incident. These guys are high-profile folks from California, from Los Angeles. China wants to make nice with California. I think California and China are like the two biggest trading partners in the world, or something crazy like that.
Well, and I don't know, I don't know how high up in the government something like this goes, but it is interesting to note that President
Donald
Trump is currently on a trip to Asia, like dealing with all kinds of trades. And we don't need to get really into politics or anything, but the president has a big entourage over in Asia right now, and he's going to be there for the next like week and a half.
And this is going to be this is not something where you have local attorneys or even like California attorneys or California state. This is going to be the State Department having to get involved to try and get these guys out.
But I'm telling you, China, the last thing China wants is an embarrassing situation where every UCLA graduate is afraid to go to China or thinks poorly of China. These guys are going to be released, I think, very quickly. That's my prediction on all of this.
I don't think it'll be quickly. I don't think it'll be quickly, but I do think they will eventually be released. Especially, here's the thing: you have to recognize that LiAngelo Ball is kind of the wild card in this scenario because LeVar Ball's over there. He was about to have a press conference sometime today or this evening. With just him because he couldn't get his son out. But you also have the fact that Lonzo Ball is now, an NBA player. He's a growing star, however you want to, whatever side of the debate you want to fall. That will come into play, especially with China. Now, here's a scenario. LiAngelo Ball gets released, but these other guys don't. That could possibly happen because of the star power of Lonzo Ball and the potential for dollars to be made with him in China.
Wow. God, I mean, it's a crazy story. We'll see what happens with it. By the way, it's worth noting that Cody Riley and Jalen Hill are both much better players than LiAngelo Ball.
Yes.
Well, we had talked about here on the show, and I know that we've read about LiAngelo being the worst of the three Ball brothers. So, not a huge loss for the Ball family, right? They've got they got another NBA player in the family now. They'll have another one in a couple of years.
It's funny you mentioned that. Like, LaMelo is actually over there too. The whole family, other than Lonzo, was in China to watch this game. I think I sent you guys this earlier. There was a meme going around of the family pick portrait from Lonzo Ball's draft night, but they cropped out LiAngelo and said the new family portrait. And it was just LeVar, Lonzo, and LiAngelo in the picture.
Oh boy.
So I can totally see LeVar Ball holding a news conference where he talks about how his son may be a criminal, but he's wearing the right shoes, and LeVar does nothing but talk about their big baller brand shoes constantly throughout the news conference. I think that's a LeVar kind of thing to do.
Yeah, I mean the number of like characters and involved in this story just means that the possible outcomes are like endless.
It's crazy. We'll keep track of it, even though it's not really related to Duke or the ACC. Although it's certainly a distraction for UCLA as they play Georgia Tech. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. So, folks, once again, I want to thank our sponsors for this edition of the DBR podcast, the law firm of Bird Campbell. You can reach them online, by the way, at birdcampbell.com, BYRDCAMPBELL.com. Bird Campbell means business. And I want to give you a quick story, because one of the ways that the guys from Bird Campbell sponsor the podcast is they send us comments and thoughts and things like that about Duke basketball, because these guys are huge Duke fans. And Tucker Bird sent this to us just yesterday. He was reacting to the fact that Duke suspended 3 freshmen for the Bowie State game a few days ago because they didn't go to classes. They were tardy to some of the classes. And here's what Tucker Bird wrote. He said, the suspensions of the freshmen for the Bowie State game for academic reasons, including tardiness, shows yet again the stark difference between Duke and Carolina. At Duke, if you disrespect your teacher and show up late for class, Duke doesn't even let you dress for an exhibition game against Bowie State. Carolina, he says, didn't even require the players to know the teachers or show up to the classes at all. Duke players have a lot more to worry about than the NCAA. They have to worry about a higher calling. They have to worry about Coach K. So that comes from Tucker Bird. And again, we want to thank the guys at Bird Campbell for sponsoring the DBR podcast, as they do all the time. If you are in need of legal services in the states of Texas or Florida, please look up Bird Campbell. All right, gentlemen, we continue with this edition of the DBR podcast. As promised, it is time for the games that count to begin. I am so excited. This weekend, Duke's season actually starts for real. We get to see the Blue Devils. Yeah, we get to see them playing against actual legit Division I competition. The first game, Friday at 7 p.m., Duke will play Elon. And by the way, I'm going to give you a couple quick things about Elon before I toss it over to Sam, who's going to give us a full rundown of what to expect in this game. Elon is not, this is cupcake season. Elon isn't exactly a huge cupcake. Ken Pomeroy in his preseason rankings has them number 106, which is better than NC State and Pittsburgh. And ESPN's Basketball Power Index, ESPN's BPI, says Elon has an 11% chance of actually winning this game. And they're going to be, look, it's going to be a battle of young versus old, because Elon, they bring back all their players. They're very experienced. They're going to do nothing but start juniors and seniors, and Duke's going to be starting nothing but freshmen and one senior. So, Sam, I toss it over to you. Tell us a little bit more about Elon as Duke opens the season with them Friday at 7.
Yeah, so they, like you said, they bring back an experienced, balanced team. They had 4 guys last year who averaged double-digit points, and the 5th guy came pretty close. He averaged about 9 points a game. So, I guess the first unfortunate thing that everyone should be warned about is that, in case you forgot, Grayson Allen's big tripping incident last year happened against Elon, and the Elon player who was involved in that, Steven Santa Anna, is still on the team. He's still one of the starters. He's a junior, and so get ready to be treated to lots of replays of Grayson Allen tripping Steven Santa Anna and then going to the bench and crying, because you're not going to be able to avoid it. The key here that Jason touched on is that Elon's really experienced and Duke is not. So it's going to be interesting, I think, to see how Coach K handles the rotation here, because he's got all these guys playing in their first Division I game, and also sort of how he game plans for them, because the because obviously the defense is going to take a little bit of time to come together for Duke. This Elon team knows how to play with each other. They're not the greatest team on offense, but they do share the ball decently well. And they also play defense pretty well. They're kind of, Jason mentioned that they're sort of in the like low 100s in KenPom, and I expect that the offense and defense will both be around that area. That they're a balanced team. They're an experienced team. The other guys that are going to be interesting to look for, they've got two forwards who start, Tyler Sebring, who's a junior, and Brian Dawkins, who's a senior. And as we know, Duke's got a couple of good forwards starting for them as well. So look for Bagley and Carter to see what they can do against experienced big men. We're going to be talking all season.
But it's worth noting Dawkins and Sebring both 6'8", in the 220 to 240 kind of range. So they won't be huge impediments. They won't.
But they know what they're doing.
But yeah, and they will be able to physically. It won't be like when we were playing the exhibitions against guys who were
exactly
6'4".
Exactly. So I think we made that point talking about the exhibitions about how discount a little bit of what you see from the big men because they're going to have an enormous size advantage, if not an experience advantage over their exhibition opponents. Elon's a great team to jump into because you have these experienced forwards, a junior and a senior, who have a little bit more size, not the same kind of like NBA level size, but enough that you can envision Duke's young big men getting frustrated by it. And like I said, they know how to play defense. They've been playing together for a few years. So start looking for that now. And this will be, like Jason said, this is not a real cupcake game the way that we normally see them. Elon's competitive. They have aspirations to make the NCAA tournament this year. They're gonna do well in the Colonial. So we in theory we could see them down the line. I mean, if Duke ends up being a 2 seed or a 3 seed, Elon would be right in there as a 14 or 15 to make the NCAA tournament if they win that conference. So this team has high aspirations, and I think it's a good one for Duke to get started with, especially for us as fans watching, because we're going to be able to make a lot more judgments about what we're seeing from this team early in the season based on how they do against Elon, and especially since heading into next week, Duke's got a huge game against Michigan State, and we're not going to have a ton of data to go on for how we think we match up with them. This is probably the best opportunity for that. So look at the rotation and look at especially how the big men perform against them. Elon's experienced, and they have goals this year of making the tournament. So I think it's a great game for Duke to be playing early. And obviously, I do like when Duke plays teams that are local. When they play teams like Elon, NC Central, UNC Wilmington, all that, all those kinds of teams. I think it's good for the area and for college basketball.
So that's on Friday. Duke does something very unusual. They play back-to-back. It's not something that we do all that often. We play Friday at 7 against Elon. We play Saturday at 7 against Utah Valley. Utah Valley, not considered quite as good as Elon, but not a complete pushover either. Ken Pomeroy says Utah Valley should be about number 166 in the nation. And one interesting thing, they will also be a team that will be full of juniors and seniors. They're going to start nothing but old guys. They have a transfer, a 7-footer named Akolda Manyang, who is 7 feet tall and who is a great rim protector. He averaged like more than 1 block for every 5 minutes of playing time. I think he was on Oklahoma. God, I forget who he played for, but I mean, this is a guy who's an elite shot blocker. And it's going to be really interesting to see our big men up against them. Donald, I know you looked at Utah Valley. Tell me a little bit more about what we should expect in that game.
Yeah, well, the first thing is, this is kind of something that has been going on for a few years now. The back-to-back games to start the season is usually as part of the whatever conference, or not whatever conference tournament, whatever preseason invitational that we're in, this one being the PK80 invitational. We've had this before. So this is kind of a good test for our freshmen to see One, this is going to be like an ACC tournament or an NCAA tournament. It may not be the type of opponents that we're going to see, but the back-to-back and getting your body kind of used to that is. One thing that also you have to figure out, this is going to be the first test for their legs. Utah Valley is going to be tired as well. They play Kentucky on Friday night and then come to Durham to face the Blue Devils. So the freshmen, I'm going to give you a couple of guys on Utah Valley that you should expect to watch for, and then a couple of keys for our team. First of all, you have Connor Toolson, who's a 6'4" junior guard. He led their team in scoring last year with almost 12 points a game. So he's going to be a guy that is going to look to shoot. He's not a great shot from the outside, but he's going to take a lot of their outside jumpers. Also, Kenneth Ogby, a 6'7" guard from Munich, actually. He averaged 10.6 points per game, and he actually is a better three-point shooter than Connor Toolson is. He's at 41%. So he's going to try and shoot the long ball. He's going to try and stretch the defense out. But inside, they have a guy other than the guy that Jason mentioned. They have Isaac Nielsen, who's 6'11". He averaged 9.1 rebounds a game. So they're going to have a couple of guys. They've also recruited some height. Last year, they didn't have a lot of height. This year, they have 4 guys who are 6'11" or taller. Including a couple freshmen. They're tall, but they don't have a lot of size. So we're still gonna be bigger than them. We're gonna have a lot more mass on the inside and outside. But one thing we need to do, other than the legs part, we have to play physical. We have to have the energy. That's we don't want to have the energy lack from Elon to Utah Valley. You want to maintain that throughout the weekend. And this is going to be where the leadership of the juniors or of the senior and the upperclassmen are going to come into effect, because these guys are going to have to push the freshmen to say, look, I know it's Elon, I know it's Utah Valley, but we got to still bring the energy as if it is Michigan State, because we're going to get that energy level going and trying to keep it up through Michigan State. These are the 2 tests. So Utah Valley, while they're not as good as Elon and they're not expected to be as good as Elon, they still pose a formidable task in the sense of, can we come out and play our game? Because if we do, we're going to run them out of the gym. If we have any energy issues or any issues with regards to motivation, that's when a team like Utah Valley can catch us, and we don't want that to happen.
Yeah, and I love the fact that we're going to be facing a team that has real height and a stud shot blocker in Akolda Maniang. You're right, Maniang's not going to start for them, I don't think. But this dude is an elite rim protector. And it's going to be really interesting to see how guys like Bolden and Carter, who operate in the post, how they do against against a guy who's going to be every bit their size and has good length and knows how to block shots. It's a great opening weekend test for Duke. We think of these programs as cupcakes. I've said it a couple times. These 2 programs are not cupcakes. I mean, they're not teams that are locks to make the NCAA tournament, but both of them have NCAA tournament aspirations. Both of them figure to be playing in the postseason. Both of them figure to win, somewhere between 18 and 22 games in the season. These are the kind of opponents that, you can do really well in your RPI by playing teams like this, but every so often it can happen. You could lose, especially with a really, really young team playing a really experienced team. So it'll be really interesting. It'll be
one
interesting.
more note on Utah Valley.
Yeah.
Chris Burgess is an assistant coach for that program, so we'll definitely be treated to some brief Chris Burgess highlights during this game.
Yes, and Chris Burgess highlights will have to be brief. There weren't a lot of them.
That's what I mean. For those who don't remember, because I don't, Chris Burgess played at Duke. He was at Duke for what, two seasons?
Yeah, 99.
He was in the recruiting class with Shane Battier and Elton Brand, right?
And William Avery.
William Avery.
Three B's and an A.
Yeah. That sounds better than how I usually did at Duke. Anyway, but Chris Burgess transferred after 2 years back. I think he went to Utah afterwards. But he's originally from Utah. I believe he is Mormon. And he's now coaching at Utah Valley. So If you have any fond memories of Chris Burgess, you can dig them up. If you don't have fond memories, whatever, he's on the other sideline now.
Quick side note, an amazing thing about that 1999 recruiting class, which I remember vividly, it is the first class in history where you had 3 number 1 players, 3 guys who at one time were ranked as the top player in the class, go to the same school. At one point,
That was a 97 class.
Yeah, 97.
Yeah, Burgess, Brandon, and Battier.
It's just 99. 99.
Oh, I apologize. It was the class of 97, correct? Right.
Yes.
I was thinking 99 was the year that they were really good.
And 2 of them actually stuck around to win a national championship.
Yes, they did. No, only one of them did.
Only one. Nate James was the class.
Oh, just kidding. Yeah. You're right. Sorry.
But
confusing them.
I was going to say that when those guys were in high school juniors, Chris Burgess was the number 1 player in the class. When they at one point during the senior year, Shane Battier was the number 1 player in the class, and then by the end of their senior year, Elton Brand was the number 1 player in the class. And all 3 of them joined William Avery in coming to Duke. You're right, in 1997. I apologize. I have the 99. They were most prominent on that 99 team that I still believe is one of the best teams to not win an NCAA title, perhaps the best team to not win an NCAA title. But anyway, enough of that stuff. All right, guys. So it's time for our parting shots. I can't believe it feels like we just did this a couple days ago, but we have to have parting shots again. Donald, let me start with you. I took the obscure Duke reference with the women's field hockey team a couple days ago. Do you have an obscure Duke sports thing that you want to highlight for your parting shot?
Well, I wouldn't call them obscure because it's one of my favorite sports, but I actually have 2 parting shots. The first one is a shout out to the Duke women's soccer team. They earned a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, where they will take on UNC Greensboro this Saturday at Koskinen. I believe is at the same time as the Duke Utah Valley game. But if you don't have a ticket to that game, you can literally walk maybe 100 yards through the parking lot to Koskinen Stadium and watch the number 1 seeded Duke women's soccer team take on UNC Greensboro. Good luck to the women. But I also want to do a quick congrats because it is Tuesday. It is election day in Virginia. And I know we don't get political on this, but a Duke alum, a Duke DC board member, and a good friend of mine, Justin Fairfax, was elected Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. So congratulations to my friend Justin, a Duke 2000 alum and a hell of a guy. So just want to point that out. And for all the people who ran today, best of luck to you guys going forward.
I'm sorry, did you say this guy graduated from Duke in 2000 and he's Lieutenant Governor of Virginia?
That is correct. He is now he's the Lieutenant Governor elect. The current Lieutenant Governor is now the governor.
Right, it's the governor. Right. Okay, so I graduated well before 2000 and I feel like a failure now. So thanks a lot. I appreciate that.
It's not my fault. I didn't get elected.
And by the way, I want to say, when I say obscure, I didn't mean like, that these other sports teams are minor or unimportant, but most people tend to focus on the revenue sports of men's basketball and football, and to a lesser extent, maybe women's basketball. I didn't mean to demean the field hockey team or the soccer team. I apologize. I'm apologizing in advance. You guys are valuable. You guys play hard and you represent us really, really, really well. And we're incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. So parting shot number 2 now. Sam, it is your turn for parting shot.
Sure. So among all the crazy news today, there was one bit of sad news that former Phillies and Blue Jays pitcher Roy Halladay died in a plane crash. Really tragic. He wasn't that old. He was only about 40. And I have been a baseball fan my whole life since about 1995. Roy Halladay was probably one of the best pitchers that I ever saw, like in the 2000 to 2010 years. He played on the Blue Jays for a few years, and then went over to Philadelphia, where he was just an absolute star. Threw a no hitter in the playoffs one year. Really, really tragic. But But for those who remember watching him, they know like what a star he was. And from all the accounts that were coming out today about him, it sounds like players and writers and owners and kind of everybody who interacted with him like only had the most positive stuff to say about him. And I think one player that I follow on Twitter, Brandon McCarthy, who's a pitcher, had a really poignant point about it. He said, Roy Halladay is your favorite player's favorite player. And I thought that really encapsulated it well. So rest in peace to one of the best pitchers that I've ever seen, Roy Halladay.
I was in Philadelphia on May 29th, 2010, when he had his perfect game against the Marlins. And it was so surreal to be in Philly. I mean, the game wasn't in Philly, but to just see literally every single television set in that city was turned onto that game. Every single eyeball, whether they were driving, whether they were walking, was fixated on this game. It was completely surreal to be a part of that. And they celebrated like they had won the World Series, which they had done a couple of years prior. So he really, when he pitched, people watched, and literally time stopped, it seemed, when he was on the mound. And he was just an incredible talent, gone far too soon.
Yeah, and I hate that I have to follow that. I should have been smart and saved that for the very last one, but I have to follow that, and those are just the rules of how the chips fall. My parting shot relates to college basketball, relates pretty closely to college basketball, because it's all about the preseason picks. And ESPN today unveiled, they have 26 experts at ESPN, 26 people who are paid by ESPN to have opinions about college basketball.
They still have 26 writers at ESPN?
They still have 26 of them, yes. And they all picked their Final Four. They picked their champions. They picked their player of the year. They picked their coach of the year. And just really quickly, dominated by Michigan State. Even though Duke is the preseason #1 team, ESPN's pickers, 14 of the 26 pickers picked Michigan State to win the national title. Only 4 of them picked Duke. 4 of them also picked Arizona, and then Kentucky, Kansas, Xavier, and Florida each got 1 pick each to win the national title. Most of the player of the year picks were for Miles Bridges. Grayson Allen got 2. Marvin Bagley got 1. There are exactly zero out of 26 people who say that Coach K will win Coach of the Year. I think we've established a while ago, we had this discussion last year. I was pissed off about it then. I'll be pissed off about it now. I think it's preposterous. It's silly. It's stupid. How can you say that Coach K isn't in the running for Coach of the Year every time Duke has a top team? Do you think that he is automatically ordained and given a top team? No, he works very, very hard to bring in these recruits, to teach them how to play together and to succeed. But no, ESPN says the Coach of the Year is going to be all kinds of other people, not Coach K. And by the way, before you think, oh, that's because he's been around a long time, the most popular Coach of the Year pick on ESPN is Tom Izzo, who has been around for a very, very, very long time.
And who also won't win.
Anyway, regardless of all that, put all that out of your mind, because there's a different thing I wanted to talk about with this. So, like I said, ESPN, they picked their champions, player of the year, coach of the year. They also picked their Final Four. And as you're going through the final, and most of the Duke shows up a lot in there. 14 of the 26 folks picked Duke to make the Final Four. But I looked down at Dan Dakich. Dan Dakich picked Ohio State to make the Final Four. And I went, what? Ohio State. Ken Pomeroy says Ohio State is the number 78 team in the country.
And they have a new coach.
They went, hold on. They went 17-15 last season. 17-15. They didn't even make the NIT. And their top 2 players, Trevor Thompson and Mark Loving, both graduated. So you must think, oh, well, Ohio, they must be bringing in a stud freshman class. They must be bringing in a bunch of great recruits. No. I mean, it's okay. They've got 2 4-star recruits and a 3-star recruit. I mean, it's fine, but it's nothing special. So why on earth is Dan Dakich picking Ohio State to make the Final Four? Well, Ohio State also has brought in a transfer from Michigan. Now, he was a little used bench warmer. He averaged just 4 minutes per game in his Michigan career. He didn't play in very many games, but his name is Andrew Dakich. And you can probably guess who Andrew Dakich's father is. His father is Dan Dakich. Now,
yeah, so Jason, this is a great lesson in don't feed the trolls. And Dan Dakich is like a king of the trolls.
Yes. Dan Dakich, when his son was at Michigan, picked Michigan to win basically every Big Ten championship and basically get to the Final Four every year because he does not know when to separate his familial bloodline from what he gets paid to actually do. So, yeah, Ohio State's not going anywhere.
So, but wait. So, Donald, you just said what matters here, which is, I mean, this is his, you said he gets paid. This is his job. Making Final Four picks is part of what ESPN pays Dan Dakich to do. And he's laughing about it. I mean, can you imagine if in my place of work, I just sort of went, ha, 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 I'll just do a funny thing for my kids that relates to my job. No, I'd get fired. Sam, guys, wouldn't you guys get fired if you did something like that?
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair to Dan Dakich, Steve Spurrier never lost his coach's vote.
Oh, damn. Damn, that's pretty good.
Man, he brought it right down on you. Listen, there are
oh boy.
there are a handful of there are a handful of sports personalities I think that are like more ridiculous than Dan Dakich, but he's definitely like in the bottom tier for me personally. I would advise anyone who like listens to him to just stop. He usually doesn't have much. He's one of those guys. Even without this Ohio State thing and his son being on the team, in general, he's just a Big Ten guy, and is going to stump for the Big Ten, even though they haven't won a national championship since since I was in middle school. So I don't know. Ignore Dan Dakich. Don't worry about his opinions.
Okay. All right. Well,
just calm down. This is a great reminder to subscribe to The Athletic, where all the good college basketball writers are now.
Hey, you're absolutely right. That's an excellent point. He is not worth listening to, and Donald shut me up with the whole Steve Spurrier thing. But I looked at it. I just kind of went, "Come on, Dan. I mean, you're such a jerk."
I mean, that part is completely fair because every time he appears on my television, I go, "Come on, Dan." Like it's fine. That part, all good. It's always good to rail on Dan Dakich.
Okay. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the DBR Podcast. Folks, thanks so much for tuning in once again. If you love the podcast, I ask this every time. I'm going to ask it again. Please go to iTunes and give us a rating. It's really good for our search results. Rate us on iTunes. If you don't love the podcast, please email us. Or if you just want to ask us a question, feel free to email us at dbrpodcast@gmail.com. That is dbrpodcast@gmail.com. If you're interested in being a sponsor, we spoke about our sponsors earlier in the podcast. We can get your message out. Email us again at dbrpodcast@gmail.com. That's going to do it for us this week. I am Jason Evans. Thank you so much for joining us. Sam Klein, Donald Wine, thanks for helping me out on this podcast. And Duke Band, it's your turn. Take us home.